Do not leave me! Eliza screamed, her voice a raw thing breaking against the cold night. One hand clutched her belly, the other reached for the wagon as it thundered away. Mud and slush sprayed from the wheels, a final insult. "You're just trouble, Eliza!" the outlaw leader spat back, his laugh like rocks grinding together. "Who the hell gets pregnant in the middle of a heist?" He cracked the reins, a sharp sound like a bone snapping. "Die here or die later. Ain't our concern." The wagon was swallowed by the black pines, its lantern light a fading scar on the dusk. Eliza collapsed. Her knees hit the frozen earth, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Snow started to fall, weak flakes mixing with her sweat, her tears, and the slow, spreading warmth of blood between her legs. Her body seized, a contraction like a hot knife twisting in her gut. She cried out, half curse, half prayer, but the forest gave no answer. She had to move. She dragged herself behind a huge hollow log, every inch a war against a pain so big it threatened to swallow the world. Her hands tore at her skirts. Her teeth gritted against the scream clawing its way up her throat. Darkness was pressing in, a heavy blanket trying to smother her, but her will to live burned hotter. The first baby came just after midnight, a slick, silent gasp of life in the freezing dark. The second followed just minutes later. Tiny, covered in blood, but alive. Both of them. Boys. She wrapped them in flannel torn from her own coat, cradling them against her bare chest, trying to give them what little warmth she had left. She rocked back and forth, whispering through cracked, bleeding lips. "You do not die," she swore to them, a promise to the universe. "Mama's here. You live." Her voice faded. Her eyes fluttered. The world was going gray at the edges. The wind picked up, rattling the trees like old bones. The babies whimpered, a sound so small it barely existed, but someone heard it. Further back in the shadows, a figure watched. Tanga, son of the Comanche war chief, was crouched between two cedars, his moccasins silent in the snow. His bow was still, his knife glinted at his hip. He'd been tracking that outlaw wagon, not for the woman, but for the men. The same men who had slaughtered a merchant camp near his people's sacred water source. He hadn't expected this. A white woman, alone, birthing on Comanche land. He should have turned away. He should have let the forest claim her. He'd made a vow, a promise sworn in blood and ash, that he would never again lift a hand for one of the invaders. Not after what they did to his mother. Not after his little brother's cries were swallowed by fire. He rose slowly, his eyes cold as the stones in a winter river. But then he heard it again, that soft, broken sound of an infant crying. He froze. The sound clawed at his spine. It wasn't like the battle cries of men or the wails of mourning women. This sound was pure, unknowing, alive. He clenched his jaw so hard it ached. He turned away, forcing his feet to move. But the crying grew sharper, more desperate. One of the babies had rolled slightly in Eliza's weak arms, its tiny face tinged with blue, its lips searching for warmth that wasn't there. A gust of wind snapped through the clearing, kicking snow over their small, shivering bodies. Tengwa cursed, a low growl under his breath. He was a warrior, not a savior. But the image of his brother's face, small and terrified, flashed behind his eyes. He spun around, his decision made in an instant. Moments later, he was dismounted beside her. Eliza flinched, barely able to raise her head. "Please," she whispered, her voice no louder than the wind sighing through the pines. "Please, not my boys." He knelt, his movements economical and precise. He examined the infants first. They were barely breathing, their skin so pale it was almost translucent. Then he checked her. She was feverish, but her pulse was steady. He took a long, slow breath. "Not for you," he said, low and in his own tongue. "For the ones who have not yet learned to hate." He reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a water skin and a thick hide blanket. He wrapped the infants first, their tiny forms disappearing into the soft fur. Then, with a strength that seemed impossible, he lifted Eliza as if she weighed nothing at all. She whimpered but didn't resist. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he carried them all toward the ridge, his face set like stone, unreadable. The moon climbed high above the trees, a wide silver eye, watching the Comanche warrior vanish into the darkness with the woman nobody wanted and the two new lives who had not yet chosen a side in any war. The smell of smoke and warm hide was the first thing she noticed. Eliza's eyes blinked open, slow and heavy. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her body was a symphony of throbbing aches, but the warmth confused her. She wasn't dead. She wasn't in the frozen woods. She was somewhere else. Above her, a ceiling of sewn animal hides rippled softly, stretched tight over a rounded frame. The light filtering through the seams was weak, the kind that comes just before dawn. Outside, the wind howled, but in here, it was still and quiet. Warmer than she had any right to be. She was lying on a soft mat of deer hide and woven reeds. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head. And there they were. Her boys, her two tiny sons, curled against her side, wrapped in a blanket of buffalo fur and fox pelt, something softer than she had ever felt. Their cheeks were flushed with life, their breathing steady and deep. They looked like nothing bad had ever happened to them. She started to cry then, silent tears of relief and confusion. The sheer, crushing weight of being alive when every part of her had prepared for death. A shadow stirred by the flap of the lodge. Eliza tensed instantly, her arms curling tighter around her sons. But it wasn't a threat. An old woman entered, her movements slow and deliberate. Her braids were long and threaded with silver, falling almost to her waist. Her face was a map of lines carved by sun and sorrow. She said nothing. She simply crossed the lodge and placed a small wooden bowl beside Eliza, along with a spoon carved from bone. Steam rose from the thick, warm mixture inside. It smelled of corn and herbs, a simple, nourishing porridge. Eliza's throat was dry and raw. "Where am I?" she whispered. The old woman didn't answer. She just gave a small nod, not of reassurance, but of simple recognition, and then slipped back outside without a sound. Eliza held her sons to her chest, trying not to shake. She knew where she was now. A Comanche camp. She'd heard the stories her whole life, whispered tales of savages and war cries. But this place, this quiet warmth didn't match the tales. I'm a burden, she thought, a cold dread seeping into her bones. They'll kill me as soon as my boys are strong enough. The porridge sat untouched. When the flap stirred again, she jerked upright, ignoring the sharp pain in her side. It was him, the warrior from the woods. He was tall, his shoulders broad, and his presence filled the small space like thunder gathering before a storm. His face was unreadable, his skin like polished bronze, marked by a thin, white scar across his jaw. His bow was slung across his back, but his hands were empty. No, wait. He was carrying something. A rabbit, already cleaned and skinned, ready for the fire. He didn't speak. He just walked to the edge of the small fire circle and placed the rabbit beside the untouched bowl of porridge. Eliza flinched away from him. "Don't come any closer," she said, her voice sharp with fear. "I won't let you touch them." His dark eyes flicked to hers. They weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They were just watching, weighing. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady, thick with an accent but clear enough. "Eat, then feed them." That was all he said, just a simple command. He turned to leave, but as he did, she saw his hands, the deep lines in his skin, the calluses, the small scars. These weren't just the hands of a warrior. They were the hands of a man who worked, who chopped firewood, who worked leather, who built things. He disappeared through the flap, leaving her alone again. For a long time, she just sat there, frozen. Then, quietly, into the empty space he had left behind, she whispered a question to the silent lodge. "Who are you?" But no answer came. Only the wind in the trees outside, whispering in a language far older than either of them. Morning light slid through the cracks of the hide tent, casting slivers of gold over her sleeping sons. For the first time, Eliza didn't feel like prey. She sat up, holding the boys close, and just listened. The camp was waking up around her, a murmur of low voices, the crackle of fires, the hiss of water being boiled over coals. Outside, she could see a group of elders sitting in a circle. One of them, an old woman with a face lined like a river map, glanced toward her tent and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A few moments later, a young boy, maybe 10 years old, ran inside, his moccasins making no sound on the earthen floor. He pointed to each of her babies in turn and announced a single word for each. "Naui," he said, pointing to the boy with slightly darker hair. "Swano," he said, pointing to the one with lighter eyes. Eliza blinked, confused. "What?" The boy grinned. "Naui," he repeated. "Means wind. Swano means light." Her throat tightened for a reason she couldn't name. It felt important. She managed a soft, "Thank you." Later that morning, she ventured outside for the first time. Her legs were weak, but she carried her sons in a sling of softened hide the old woman had given her. The air smelled of wood smoke and winter herbs. Children ran past her, laughing and chasing a small dog. No one stopped her, but she felt their eyes on her. Glances from tents, from over shoulders. She was a ghost here, something that didn't belong. Still, the names echoed in her mind. Naui and Swano. It was the first time anyone had given something to her, instead of taking, since her husband had died. It was the first time it felt like she wasn't just surviving, but being allowed to exist. But then a voice, sharp and bitter as gall, cut through the quiet morning. "You should not be here." Eliza turned. A young woman stood across the clearing, her arms folded tight across her chest, her dark eyes burning like hot coals. "You are a ghost lover," the woman spat, her braids swinging as she took a step forward. "A walker of lies. You carry their poison blood in our sacred land." Eliza stiffened. "I didn't ask to be here." "But you came, like they always do," the woman sneered. She reached into a small leather pouch at her belt and pulled out something gray and crumbling. "Ash." "Go!" she hissed. "Go before I scatter your breath to the four winds." A new voice cracked across the camp, like a branch splitting in a fire. "Takani!" Tangwa stepped into view, his shadow falling long and dark beside the fire pit. His jaw was tight, his eyes even darker than Eliza remembered. He raised a single hand, a clear gesture of command. "No one harms the mother of the ones I brought home." A ripple of silence spread through the camp. Thunder without lightning. Takani's face twisted with fury and something else. Betrayal. She glared at Eliza one last time, then turned and stormed away, the gray ash spilling from her clenched fist like a failed curse. Eliza stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her sons whimpered against her chest, sensing her fear. She waited until the murmurs faded, until the air felt breathable again. Then she walked forward, her legs shaking, and stopped in front of Tangwa. "Why did you say that?" she asked, her voice trembling. His eyes were fixed on the distant horizon. "I did not say it for you." Eliza swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "Then why?" "For them," he said, his gaze finally dropping to the two small bundles in her sling. "I will not let them be hated for the blood they cannot change." "But you could have left me there," she whispered, the words tasting like defeat. You could have let me die. He looked at her then, a long, searching look that seemed to see right through her skin. I did once, he said, his voice so low she barely heard it. Once, I walked away from a woman crying for help. I saw the fire take her. I will not do it again. Eliza's lips parted, but no words came out. What could she say to that? The wind answered for her, cold and clean across her skin. And in that moment, something deep inside her shifted. It wasn't love. It wasn't even trust. It was just a thread. A fragile, invisible thread of understanding that now tangled between the warrior, the outcast woman, and the two tiny lives sleeping against her heart. The days grew shorter, colder. The bond between them grew in silence. Eliza's fingers trembled as she tried to mimic the Comanche word Tangua had just taught her. No-ah, she said, the sound clumsy on her tongue. Tangua nodded once, a flicker of something soft in his eyes. Fire. She smiled, a small, faint thing, and repeated it, stronger this time. Noah. In return, he fumbled with a cloth diaper, one of the twins squirming in his lap. His brow furrowed in concentration. Eliza reached over, her touch gentle, and guided his large, scarred hands, showing him how to fold the edge just so. Not too tight, she murmured. Their eyes met for a fleeting second over the baby's head. No words of gratitude were spoken, but something hung in the air between them, warmer than the smoke from the morning fire. One evening, they stacked firewood side by side near the lodge. He placed his bundle down, then she laid hers beside it. Their fingers brushed. A simple, accidental touch. But in the cold silence of the coming winter, it felt like a declaration. It meant they were starting to share warmth without needing words or permission. But their fragile peace was about to be shattered. Hoofbeats. Distant at first, then growing louder, thudding against the frozen earth like war drums. The camp went still. Warriors reached for their weapons. Elders pulled children inside their lodges. Eliza stood frozen, clutching the boys to her chest, her blood running cold. Tangua emerged from the edge of the woods, his bow already strung, an arrow nocked. He caught her terrified gaze, then shifted his focus to the ridge where the riders appeared. 5 of them. Pale-skinned, rifles slung across their backs. Travelers, one warrior muttered. But Eliza knew better. Her knees buckled. It was them, the gang who had left her to die. Only this time, they weren't just passing through. They were here to silence her for good. The lead man, Jed, his face half hidden by a frosty beard, dismounted. He held up a hand, a false gesture of peace. We heard you folks took in a woman, he called out, his voice oily. Blonde, with 2 little ones. We're just looking to take her back. Make sure she don't. Talk. His grin was a cruel slash in his beard. Tanga's stance shifted, becoming more solid, more rooted to the earth. There is no one here like that. Jed laughed, a thin, ugly sound. I think we'll have a look around anyway. We have reason to believe one of them babies is mine. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Eliza's heart stopped. It was a lie, a venomous, possessive lie, but a dangerous one. Tangua didn't even blink. He simply raised his hand a little higher, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. You look, you die. That night, the campfires burned low. A cold rain began to fall, turning the dirt to slick, black mud. Tangua didn't argue or explain. He simply took Eliza and the babies beyond the cliffs, into a narrow crevice hidden behind a waterfall of rock, just wide enough for them to hide. He lit no torch. He spoke no loud words. The air inside the small cave was cold and damp. Eliza shivered, cradling her sons as they whimpered softly against the chill. Water trickled down the stone walls, each drop echoing in the tense silence. Tangua sat just outside the entrance, a silhouette against the gray, stormy night. He was soaked through, his bow resting across his lap. He did not move. He did not sleep. He just watched. When the storm rose to a fever pitch, the wind howling like a pack of wolves, he slipped inside for a moment. He took off his heavy outer coat of buffalo hide and laid it gently over her shoulders. "You will freeze," she whispered, her teeth chattering. He shook his head. The warmth from the coat was immediate, smelling of him, of smoke and leather and rain. Then finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady against the roar of the storm. "I swore an oath. After the fire, after the blood of my family stained the earth, I swore I would never again save a white life. Never again open my hand to a mouth that would only curse it." He looked at her then, his eyes dark pools in the gloom. "But I broke that vow for you." Eliza's own eyes burned with unshed tears. "Why?" she choked out. "Because you are not like them," he said simply. The wind moaned through the stones, a mournful sound. "You bled for your children," he continued, his gaze dropping to the sleeping babies. "But you stayed breathing for them, too. That matters." She couldn't answer. The words were caught in her throat. But when he turned back to the cave entrance, resuming his vigil against the night and the rain and the men who wanted them dead, she did not sleep either. She just watched him, watched every breath, every silent motion. Because she was finally starting to understand that sometimes, the ones who say the least are the ones who protect everything that matters. The night of the fire festival arrived with the turning of the season. The air was thick with the promise of spring. Smoke from a great central fire curled into the black sky, and sparks rose to meet the stars. The entire Comanche camp was gathered, their faces painted in the flickering firelight. It was a sacred tradition, a welcoming of new life, a time for new oaths to be made and old ones broken. But for the young people, it was something more. Each unmarried warrior had carved a small wooden token, a bird, a sun, a star. During the fire dance, he would offer it to the woman he wished to court, dropping it silently into her lap. If she kept it, it was a beginning. If she returned it, the carving would be cast into the fire, and the matter would be forgotten. Eliza stood at the edge of the circle, her twins sleeping soundly in the sling across her chest. The elder women had insisted she come, even sewing her a soft doeskin dress and braiding her pale hair with a single hawk feather. The music of flutes and drums filled the air, and across the clearing Tangwa stood alone, arms folded, his face a mask of shadow and flame. Then the music stopped. A sudden, expectant silence fell. The tribal chief, Tangwa's father, a tall man with silver in his braids and eyes like chips of flint, stepped into the center of the circle. He looked directly at his son. "My son," he said in the Comanche tongue, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "The camp speaks in whispers. They wonder why you brought this outsider here. They wonder why you broke your blood vow. They wonder why you risk war for a woman who is not of our people." Every eye in the clearing turned to Tangwa, then to Eliza. She held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. Tangwa stepped forward, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. His voice, when he spoke, did not tremble. "I did not bring an outsider here," he said, his words ringing with a fierce clarity. "I brought home my family." The words dropped like stones into a still pond. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The old chief's eyes narrowed, but Tangwa did not flinch. "I do not speak of blood," he continued, his voice rising. "I speak of what is born in fire and pain. She did not ask to be here, but she survived to protect her children. She learned our words. She did not beg. She became." He turned then, his burning gaze finding Eliza across the fire. "I broke a vow," he said, his voice softening just enough for her to hear the truth in it. "But I found something worth breaking it for." The old chief was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he simply stepped back, and with a nod, the drums resumed their beat. Eliza stood frozen, her heart thundering so loudly she thought the babies would wake. No one had ever claimed her like that. No one had ever called her home. As if in a dream, she watched Tangua turn away, as if the matter was settled. But for her, it was the beginning of everything. She took a step forward, then another. Words would have failed her. Instead, she placed one hand over her own heart, then reached out and placed it flat against his chest. In that simple gesture, the entire tribe saw her answer. The old woman who had first fed her nodded in approval. A young girl darted past and pressed a small, carved wooden hawk into Eliza's palm. "He made it for you," she whispered, and was gone. Eliza's fingers trembled as she traced the edges of the wooden bird. It was rough in places, imperfect, just like the man who had carved it. But it was strong. She did not drop it. She did not return it. She clutched it tight in her hand. Later that night, as the fires burned low, she sat beside her sleeping sons, the hawk figure tucked safely in a fold of her dress. Tangua came and stood beside her. "You meant it?" she asked softly, not looking up. "Family?" He nodded once. "Even me?" He didn't answer with words. He knelt beside her, reached for one of the boys, and cradled him with a gentleness that belied his warrior's strength. Eliza watched him, and for the first time since she was a little girl, she felt something steady and warm bloom in her chest. Not just safety, belonging, and it burned brighter and warmer than any festival fire. The rains came without warning, hard and cold, turning the camp into a sea of mud. The world retreated into a gray misery, and inside their lodge, the world grew smaller, hotter. Eliza pressed the back of her hand to Naui's forehead. It was burning. He whimpered, twisting in his cradle, his skin as hot as coals. Swano, his twin, lay nearby, crying in sympathy, sensing his brother's pain. "Please," she whispered, rocking Naui, her voice a raw prayer. "Please, stay with me." He let out a small, dry cough that sounded ancient and terrifying, coming from such a tiny body. The elder women brought herbs and poultices, but nothing worked. The fever only climbed higher. That night, Eliza refused to sleep. She held her son, humming broken lullabies, her heart a frantic drum of fear. Tangua entered the tent, silent as a ghost, soaked from the rain. He knelt beside her, his face grim. He saw the child's color, the red blotches blooming on his pale cheeks, the glassy look in his eyes. "Eliza," he said, his voice low, "this is no common fever. This is the ghost sickness." She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and wild with panic. "He is dying, isn't he?" Tanga didn't answer. Instead, he began pulling a leather satchel together, his movements swift and purposeful. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice cracking. "There is another tribe, 2 days' ride from here. Their healer knows the cure for this sickness." He hesitated, his jaw tight. "They are not our friends. They are the people my father wronged in his youth." Eliza grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't go alone. They will kill you." He gently pulled her fingers free. "I have to try." And then he was gone, swallowed by the rain and the darkness. The next 2 nights were an eternity of hell. Naui's breathing grew thin and shallow, his cries weaker and weaker until they were just faint, breathy sighs. Eliza stopped eating. At one point, she fell to her knees in the mud outside the lodge, sobbing into the storm, begging the dark sky. "Take me," she pleaded. "Just let him live." At dawn on the 3rd day, just as a blood-red sun burned through the clouds, a shout came from the ridge. "Tangua!" His horse stumbled into camp, foaming at the mouth, exhausted beyond measure. Tangwa slid from the saddle, a long dark gash on his arm, his shirt torn. Eliza ran to him. He staggered, thrusting a small pouch into her hands. "Boil this," he gasped. "Fast." Inside were twisted, pungent roots. Eliza rushed back to the lodge, throwing them into a pot of boiling water, feeding the bitter tea to Naui one spoonful at a time. Hours passed, a full day. She did not sleep. She did not move. Then, finally, in the deep quiet of the next dawn, Naui's fever broke. His small body cooled. He slept, a deep, healing sleep. Eliza wept, her forehead pressed against his, silent tears of gratitude washing over her. Later, she found Tangwa outside, clumsily trying to wrap a bandage around his upper arm. The gash was long, clearly from a blade. She sat beside him and took the strip of hide from his hand. "Let me." He didn't protest. Her fingers were careful and precise as she cleaned and bound the wound. When she finished, she looked him straight in the eye. "If you had not come back," she whispered, "I would not have forgiven you." She paused, then added, even quieter, "But you did, and I don't know how to thank you for my son's life." A small, weary smile touched his lips. "You already did," he said, his voice a low gravel, "when you called him our son." Eliza blinked, the truth of his words sinking in, and then, without hesitation, her hand slipped into his. The storm had passed, but her heart still echoed with thunder. Only this time, it was the sound of a new beginning. Spring finally arrived, washing the land clean. The rivers ran high, and the world smelled of thawed soil and new chances. One afternoon, as Eliza was swaying with Swano on her hip, a sentry called out, "Riders." 3 of them, moving slow, their hands held high and visible. They were white men, but they looked broken. One limped badly, another clutched a bloody bandage at his side. Their horses were thin, their eyes hollow with desperation. Immediately, Comanche warriors stepped forward, bows strung, spears angled low. Tanga arrived at a run, his face a thundercloud. "Stop," Eliza said, stepping directly between the warriors and the strangers. "They are wounded." "They are invaders," someone snapped back. Eliza held her hand up. "Let me speak to them." Tangwa narrowed his eyes, but after a long moment, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She turned to the men. "Why are you here?" The oldest rider, swaying in his saddle, tipped his hat with a shaking hand. "Ma'am, we mean no harm. We were ambushed by bandits, couple days south. Lost 2 men. Got no food, no medicine. We heard whispers that you're healers. We took a chance." Eliza studied them. Their wounds were real. Their eyes held no malice, only exhaustion and fear. These were not men looking to conquer. They were just trying to survive. She turned back to Tangwa. "Let them rest," she said, her voice firm. "Let us treat them. It would mean more than just saving 3 men. It would be a choice." Tangwa looked past her, at the children playing, at the quiet peace of the camp he had fought so hard to protect. Then, he nodded once. The warriors parted. Eliza brought water. The elders brought salves. And the strangers, who had expected death, wept with gratitude. Later that evening, Takani approached her. She was cradling Naui, who gurgled happily in her arms. Her eyes, once so full of hate, were now watchful, curious. "You trust them," she said. It wasn't an accusation. "I trust what I see," Eliza replied softly. "Not what others have told me I should hate." Takani looked down at the baby. His little hand reached up and grasped the necklace she wore. A slow smile spread across her face, small but real. "He is not afraid," she murmured. "Because no one is born with hate," Eliza said. "It has to be taught." Takani pressed her cheek against the baby's head. "Then perhaps," she whispered, "it can be untaught." Across the fire, Tangwa watched them, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Later, as stars blanketed the sky, Eliza joined him at the edge of camp. "You let them in," she said. "I know what that cost you." He was silent for a long time, staring out at the vast, dark plains. "For a long time," he finally said, "I thought protecting my people meant keeping everyone else out. And now?" Tonga turned to her, and his eyes were softer than she had ever seen them. "Now, I wonder if it means knowing who to let in." He reached out and touched her arm, his fingers just grazing her skin, a silent question. Eliza leaned into his touch. In the distance, a child laughed. "I used to think my only choice was to run," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "From danger, from loss, from my own life. But now I think I've finally found something worth staying for." The wind shifted, and for the first time, Tangua took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers without hesitation. He had lived through fire. She had survived abandonment. But standing there, with the quiet night pressing in around them, they both knew. This was not a story about escape anymore. It was the beginning of a home they no longer had to run from. The summer grass was high and golden, swaying in the heat. Wildflowers dotted the plains. Just beyond the camp, Tangua was finishing their new home. It wasn't a large lodge, but it was solid, framed with cedar posts and walled with thick buffalo hide. His hands, hardened by war and work, moved with a quiet reverence as he laid the final stones around the central fire pit. He was building more than a shelter. He was shaping a future, one piece at a time. There had been no ceremony, no spoken vows, just a shared, unspoken understanding. A decision born not of pressure, but of peace. Eliza laid the boys down on a woven mat inside. The light filtering through the seams bathed them in a golden hush. She stepped back outside into the tall grass where Tangua stood, brushing dust from his hands. "It's finished," he said, his voice steady. But their peace was bought with blood, and the debt was coming due. From the ridge, a single rider appeared. One of the men they had healed. He was riding hard, his face pale with terror. "They're coming!" he screamed as he galloped into camp. "Jed! He followed our tracks! He's got a dozen men with him!" A wave of panic rippled through the camp. Tangua grabbed his bow, his face instantly becoming the warrior's mask she had first seen. "Take the boys," he ordered Eliza, his voice sharp. "Hide in the caves." But Eliza didn't move. She looked at the lodge he had just built, their home. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm not running anymore." Tangua stared at her, then a flicker of fierce pride lit his eyes. He gave a sharp nod. The attack came at dusk. Jed and his men rode in, guns blazing, expecting a terrified camp of women and old men. They found a storm. Tangua and his warriors met them with a volley of arrows that emptied 3 saddles before the first gunshot echoed off the hills. But there were too many. The outlaws pushed into the camp, chaos erupting around the fires. Eliza, her boys safely hidden with the elder women, saw Jed making a break for their new lodge. He still believed his lie. He was coming for the babies. She grabbed a heavy iron skillet from a cooking fire and ran, not away, but toward the fight. Jed kicked open the flap of the lodge, his gun raised. He found it empty. He spun around, rage twisting his face, and found himself face to face with Eliza. "Where are they, you witch?" he snarled. "They're not yours!" she spat back. "They were never yours!" He lunged for her, but she swung the heavy skillet with all her might, catching him square on the side of the head. He staggered back, stunned, a look of disbelief on his face. That single moment was all Tangua needed. An arrow hissed through the air and embedded itself deep in Jed's chest. He collapsed without a sound. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining outlaws broke and fled, pursued into the darkness by the Comanche warriors. When it was over, silence fell, thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Tangua walked back into the center of the camp, his eyes searching for Eliza. He found her standing by their lodge, the skillet still clutched in her hand, her face smudged with soot. He walked to her and gently took the skillet from her grasp. He looked down at her hands, rough and steady, then back into her eyes. "You did not run," he said, his voice full of a quiet awe. "This is my home," she replied, her voice little more than breath. "I protect my home." Without another word, he reached for her hand, and she took it. They stood there, in the middle of their camp, their home, their family. No one watched, no one needed to. This moment was theirs alone, earned in fire and blood. In the hush of the evening, Eliza leaned against his chest, and his arms wrapped around her as the moon rose over the hills. Her eyes closed. "This is it," she whispered. "This is enough." He rested his forehead against hers. "This is everything." Later, by the fire, rocking their safe, sleeping children, she looked up at the stars. "I used to think survival was about fighting," she said, "about winning. But it's not. It's about choices, not where you start, but where you decide to stay." She turned to him. "I didn't choose to be left in the woods, but I choose this land, this home, these babies, and I choose you." Tangua watched her, a universe of unspoken emotion in his dark eyes. His thumb brushed the back of her hand. "And I choose you," he said simply. "Not for a day, not because I must, but because you are the place my soul can finally rest." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he kissed the crown of her hair. Above them, the night deepened. Around them, the land whispered its ancient lullabies. And somewhere between one breath and the next, without ceremony or title, they became what they had fought for. A family. Not born from blood, but from choice. And that choice was more than enough. It was everything. If this story stirred something deep in you, if you felt the quiet weight of love built not on words but on survival, sacrifice, and choice, then you belong here with us. We tell more than tales. We share truths that echo across canyons, over battle-scarred hearts, and through the kind of silence where real devotion grows. If you believe love can bloom even in the harshest soil, then ride with us. Subscribe, and never miss a tale where bullets miss, but hearts never do. Your next story may be the one that stays with you forever.